So now that we've done a basic introduction to the concept of probability, let's go ahead and start looking at some of the relationships that we have in probability. There are four that we're going to talk about in this lesson. We have a complement of an event, union of two events, intersection of two events, and then mutually exclusive events. So starting with the complemented event, this is useful because sometimes it's easier to calculate the probability of an event happening by determining the probability of it not happening and then subtracting that result from 1. So when you're using a complement, your events need to be what we call mutually exclusive, meaning if one happens, the other one can't, and then also collectively exhaustive, meaning between these two events, that comprises all of the potential outcomes that occupy our sample space. So here we have an example where there are three possible outcomes. An individual can be underweight, satisfactory, or overweight. And here we see that the probability of being satisfactory is 0.90. So if we wanted to know what the probability of an individual being underweight or overweight, we can use the complement rule by doing 1 minus zero point 0.9 to see that it is a probability of 0.1 that an individual could be either underweight or overweight. The union of two events is another probability characteristic that we need to talk about. That's going to be the situation where we have event A and event B overlap, meaning that we have some cases that have event A and event B occurring. So let's go back to our example from Bradley Investments where we have Markley Oil and Collins Mining. So we're looking at a situation where one or the other or both of them are profitable. So in order to figure out what our sample set will be, we look at all of the experimental outcomes and we find situations in which at least one of the experimental outcome values is positive non-zero value. And that gives us the sample set shown here, which corresponds to the cases that are indicated in red in the picture on the right. So then we can take the probability values for each of those experimental outcomes that was predetermined by an analyst using subjective probability approach, and we can add all of those probability values together with the resulting probability of one or the other or both of them being profitable being 0.82. The intersection of two events is a situation in which both criteria of A and B are satisfied. So it's just that overlap section. And so that would be an example of a question with that would be saying, what's the probability of both of them being profitable? And so that case, we're looking for our sample set being cases where both the Markley Oil value and the Collins Mining values are positive non-zero values. And so we take the probabilities of those two values and add them together to get the probability of both companies being profitable of being 0.36. With the general rule of addition, we're looking at two events, event A and event B, overlapping to illustrate the joint probability of A and B occurring. So looking at this diagram, that dark orange area is that overlap or that intersection that we talked about a few slides ago. And so with the general rule of addition, we're taking the probability of A, adding it to the probability of B, and subtracting the probability of that joint probability section because that joint probability section is accounted for in both A and B. So we need to subtract at least one instance of it so that we're not counting those observations twice. So looking at our example here, wanting to know if Markley Oil is profitable or Collins Mining is profitable. So this is looking for situations in which an observation may fall in the A circle or fall in the B circle. And so this means that the cases that are in the overlap area or that joint probability area doesn't get counted twice. So we know that the probability that Markley Oil is going to be profitable from previous calculations is 0.7. We know that the probability that Collins Mining is profitable is 0.48. And we calculated a few slides ago that the joint probability of Markley Oil and Collins Mining being profitable is 0.36. So using the general rule of addition, we do 0.70 plus 0.48 minus 0.36 to get a value of 0.82 as the probability of one or the other being profitable. Now, we did this calculation earlier with a slightly different approach by just looking at the number of cases where at least one of my observations was positive non-zero value. So this is just a confirmatory case where if you approach it either way, you will get the same answer. Another concept to look at are mutually exclusive events. So mutually exclusive means that if one happens, the other one cannot happen. These are also sometimes called disjoint cases. So examples of disjoint cases would be an outcome of a single coin toss. So if you flip a coin, you're either going to get a result of head or tails. You can't get both of them. So you can't both pass a class and fail a class at the same time. So that's what we mean when we're talking about them being mutually exclusive. All of the options are you pass or you fail, but you can't be both of them at the same time. A non-disjoint outcome are ones that can happen at the same time. So for example, you can make an A in your statistics class and you can make an A in your economics class, but those two classes are completely independent of each other. And so if you make an A in one, that doesn't mean that you're going to make an A in the other. So general rule of addition is talking about situations where there are disjointed outcomes. So if you don't have that overlap area or that joint probability area that we talked about earlier, you can just take the probability of each occurrence separately and add them together to find out what the probability is that your outcome will fall into one of the categories that you're interested in.